Hello from the Scott Learning Center in Scott, Mississippi. I'm Jay Mahaffey, manager of the site here at Scott. We had a fast and furious corn planting season here in the Delta, particularly the South Delta. And in the last few days, we've had a lot of questions come in about corn emergence and what effect does the uniformity of emergence have on corn yield potential. Thought I'd do this video today and show some of the work we did in 2021 in regards to the matter. So what we aim at all the time in corn is to have as uniform an emergence period as we can. We strive for uniformity in every way to have all the plants come up as close as they can together, but we have things that happen during the year, whether it's equipment issues, soil conditions, rainfall events, various other things that influence the speed of emergence in various fields. Our question was, at what point does that emergence delay begin to impact yield? So we established a trial last year to look into the matter. What we did was we planted DeKalb 7027 in a typical Delta manner. It was planted 2.5 inches deep. We planted 36,000 seeds per acre, and it just sort of represents the typical Delta system. The corn began to emerge about 5 days after we planted. At that point, we started to mark plants by day of emergence. We measured off 13 samples that were each 20 feet long in this area of the field. And about the same time every day, we went out and marked each plant as it emerged. We continued to do this until emergence was basically done, and most of the emergence occurred in the first 10 or 11 days after planting. So we observed some interesting things in this. The first thing, and experimentally, I want to explain a little bit about what we did. We wound up marking about 639 total ears out of this area in the field. The samples were then gone. We went out at the end of the year. We harvested each day's emerged plants individually, took those back in the lab, weighed them, hand shelled them, and then weighed the grain weight. And we corrected all the weights to a standard moisture for reporting here. So there are a few things that we observed. First of all, you'll see here that we got about 93.4% of the seed that we planted to come up and establish a plant that could then contribute to the yield of the field. This resulted in us having about 33,800 plants present in the field. And scientifically, it's very interesting to me. We harvested around this field with our commercial combine, and it recorded a yield of about 231 bushels an acre. If you take the recorded weights of the shell grain that we got in the experiment in the end, they were very similar. So I think this data is very representative of what we observe in many of these Delta production systems. One thing I would point out is that we did not see non-synchronous pollination occur for the most part across this experiment. I think if you stretch the differences out much further than we saw in this case, you might see that begin to happen, but it appears that most of the plants present in this experiment were exposed to viable pollen, and they were receptive to that pollen during the course of the time that we documented emergence here. So let's look at the data. When you look at the data, we started emergence on day 5, and it was basically done by day 10 or 11. There might have been a few that came up on day 12. So when you start to look at what we observed as we hand shelled and weighed ears, you see on these first 4 days of emergence here that we don't see basically any difference in ear weight regardless of the day. I think that goes along with previously generated data fairly well, but it's also important to note if you look at the last 2 days of emergence here, or the last 2 categories of emergence, which would be days 9, 10, and 11, those weren't zeros. So I think what the data indicates to us is that if we get the corn to come up, in a week or 8 or 9 days, it appears to be able to establish a mostly normal yield potential. And I think this can help us in evaluating some of the stands we're looking at today for replanting, or whether or not we should keep them and what we really need to do to them to optimize their potential. So as I said, in the first 8 days after planting, there were no differences. The differences tapered or began to manifest themselves a little bit in those last couple of categories. And despite any of this, we still need to aim for as uniform emergence as we can. And we've continued to follow this research up over the course of 2022. When you look at what we've done in 22, we've got an experiment I've been posting and talking a little bit about. We've got 2 locations that contain a total of 5 hybrids. We planted 1.25 inches and 2.5 inches deep because we've continually identified here at the Learning Center that planting depth, and typically a little bit deeper depth rather than a little bit shallow depth, is a very important factor we can only establish at planting that helps us to optimize our corn yield potentials. We've got 2 locations that represent the diversity present here at Scott. One of those is a silt loam, clay silt loam soil on the south side of town here. It was sort of a special case this year in that we planted it, it crusted, it sprinkled rain on it one afternoon, and it all came up in about 2 days, at the very most 3 days. We also have a silty sand spot here in front of the Learning Center facility. It was somewhat more normal distribution of emergence over the 7 to 9 or 10 days after planting. We've marked plants in those. We've done the same work that we did last year in a little bit grander style this year. But we also included a planting depth component, and you can see here on top of the screen, the planting depth component of this was 1.25 inches deep and 2.5 inches deep. And we documented emergence. We've been documenting all the things that go on in the field, but one thing we have seen already is the 2.5 inch deep planted corn. You see, we established about 88% of the planted seed as a plant that can make an ear and contribute to yield. Where in the 1.25 inch deep, we only established about 65% of those, and it's probably drifted a little bit lower than that since. Primarily due to the fact that birds were able to prey a little better on this shallow planted corn than the deeper. So we maintain that as one of the primary factors we need to be concerned about when we plant a corn crop. And it helps us establish optimal rooting mass, rooting volume, all the things that go along with having a productive corn crop. So with that, I thank you all for listening. I'd invite you to come see us this summer. We'll be here, and we've got a full research program in the field. Thanks for listening.